I read 9 books in March. Here's what I thought of them. Hello, welcome. Apologies for a few weeks off. I've been ludicrously busy. I'm running a marathon, so training has taken a lot of time out of my life, and it's also made me exhausted. Who knew running for 3 hours on a Sunday made you want to sleep for pretty much 24 hours immediately after. Anyway, I have been doing a lot of reading, and actually because of the running, I've been doing a lot of audiobook listening. So although I've been crazy busy, I still have managed to read quite a few books. I think 9 books a month is very impressive. I'm definitely ahead of target when it comes to my yearly goal. What was fun about March as well is I've been slowly getting more and more into fantasy. You'll see quite a few fantasy, dystopian, magical realism books in there, and I think what's cool about that is I'm really learning that the traditional fantasy sci-fi that we think of, where you have spaceships or fairies, is just not the only way that fantasy manifests in books. So that's really cool, and I'm actually thinking about doing like a whole video about that. I'm going to tell you about these in chronological order. As a reader, I do have books on my TBR, but I don't tend to plan ahead. Honestly, I sometimes just go into the library and will pick a book up. Kicking things off, we have Big Swiss by Jen Beagin. This book is about a woman called Greta, who is a transcriber for a sort of phony, doesn't necessarily have the legit qualifications sex therapist. And she's also pretty dodgy, absolutely lied on her CV to get this job, and for her whole life has been pretty up and down, pretty chaotic. But she's quite enjoying herself in this job until one day she transcribes a session with a woman that she nicknames Big Swiss. She falls in love with Big Swiss just through the transcript and then essentially stalks her. And then her and Big Swiss meet one day, and it goes from there. This book I saw loads on BookTok and BookTube. I think sometimes you see books being touted as really bizarre and off the wall and weird, and it means it's very easy to be let down by them. But this one did have something a little bit special about it. For one thing, it's incredibly crass, intentionally disgusting in parts, I think it's safe to say. It also has some pretty good humour in there. I don't tend to laugh out loud at books, but I did find myself chuckling a bit at points. Out loud. Proper little chuckles on the tube. I felt it fell off a little bit in the last third, and overall felt a little bit repetitive and kind of haphazard, and it was easy to lose your grip on where we were going. I do think this was kind of intentional though, so I don't feel too mad about it. Overall though, I was always desperate to return to it. I, would sit at social occasions thinking, oh, you know what, I am excited for my train home so I can read more of this book. And that doesn't happen very often, so definitely a great start to the month. Orcs and Crake by Margaret Atwood. This is a continuation of my Margaret Atwood obsession. The Handmaid's Tale was the first book of hers that I read, and that's one of my favourite books of all time. So I've kind of ended up just wanting to read all Margaret Atwood ever. I've read quite a few so far, and I'm finding it very interesting seeing how her books are similar to each other and also how they differ, and kind of understanding the order that she wrote these books in. Anyway, Orcs and Cig is a dystopian novel that is all about this future world where humans have been pretty much wiped out by a man-made disease. And your main character is Snowman, who's navigating this world and lives a pretty odd, lonely life. And the book is full of his flashbacks and him reflecting on life before. There was a huge wealth gap, and the wealthy and powerful just created all these weird and wonderful, not really wonderful, biotechnologies. It's also just quite a grisly place to be. I enjoyed this book in some ways. I think it was very Atwood. I'm learning that even if you don't like the story overall, she is very precise and just will always be pretty riveting. The question isn't whether her stories will be riveting, it's how riveting they will be. So she's reliable for that, but it didn't feel like a whole story. I finished the book feeling like something was missing, and I know that it's the first in a series, but even with that in mind, I just didn't feel satisfied. There were so many loose ends, but I also don't feel obsessed with it enough to kind of rush to the sequel. So Ninth House. This is about a Yale University freshman. She was already in a pretty dark place. She kind of flunked out of high school and was found by Yale in the midst of this crime scene. And this society from Yale, very confusing, secretive, magical society, picks her up for some reason that I won't ruin for you. And she's given this free ride to Yale. But she's pretty scrappy, and it follows her journey and kind of adventure into the fantasy world, learning about all the mysterious beasts and ghosts that lurk on the Yale campus and beyond. But there are a lot of little subplots that are pretty intriguing in themselves. It's just very readable, very intriguing. I really enjoyed the level of fantasy that was in it. I liked how it was woven into the real world, and it had a really rich atmosphere that I completely got lost in. Alex, our main character, and a lot of the other main characters, I really liked them. They were kind of rough around the edges, but also endearing, and the plot kind of ebbed and flowed quite nicely. Good pacing, there were some twists, there were some turns, nothing felt rushed. Just very solid, and as you'll see, I picked up the sequel almost immediately after reading it. But before I talk about that, Happy Place by Emily Henry. So I'm on a bit of a Emily Henry hype. I have got into her after a lot of time of kind of eyeing her suspiciously from a distance, and I have to say, Happy Place was very, very disappointing. It's about a couple who broke up ages ago, like months and months ago. They were engaged, but they didn't tell anyone that they broke up, and their friends organise this holiday and invite them both there, thinking that they're still together, and then for reasons that I never truly understand, they agree to each other to not tell their friends, like, guys, we're actually broken up. So the friends, stuff like the friends give them the sort of ultra romance double bed suites that they have to share for the holiday. And a big part of this story is Harriet trying to understand why Wyn, her ex-fiance, broke it off in the first place. She kind of understands bits, but the picture definitely isn't full in her head, and I think it was such a shock that at the time she didn't question it further. I think I just from the get-go found the premise so unrealistic, and the kind of poor communication trope was turned up to the max, not just with the couple, but them with their friends. It's just like everyone was not understanding each other at all times on every level, and it was just absurd. And then towards the end, you start to read about these quite belated and cheesy and generic epiphanies that Harriet has, that Wyn has. Like there are these things that are meant to be beautiful and momentous realizations, and for me they just fell flat because by that point I was so frustrated by the rest of the plot. Anyway, enough about that. Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo is the second of the Alex Stern series, so this is the sequel to Ninth House, and I rushed to it after reading Ninth House, and I really didn't enjoy it very much. It starts off where the last book ends, I pretty much bang on that point, and just goes from there. Like the first book, loved the atmosphere, really convincing, intriguing characters, but the plot, it just lost the plot. It was way too ambitious, really complicated in ways that it didn't need to be, and by the end, very dissatisfying. I can so see how that kind of thing could happen. I think the last book was precarious, but it just about ended up coming together in the end and made something magical. But this one, it just took a few wrong turns where the last book didn't, and I'm sad. Beach Read by Emily Henry. This, I was ready to love again. 3 books later, another Emily Henry. They're just so easy to read. This is about a romance writer who's feeling quite disillusioned. She grew up in a lovely warm household where her parents loved her and loved each other, and it was all sunshine and roses. But due to unforeseen circumstances that have completely bowled her over, smacked her in the face, she now doesn't believe in love. Everything she ever thought was a lie, and she is now in a writing rut as a result, because her classic writing style is romance, and she really relies on her own belief in love for her books to work out. Meanwhile, Augustus Everett, her nemesis from college or university, is an acclaimed author of very serious literary fiction, and she has never liked him, always felt like he's really stuck up, always found him weirdly cold to her, and they both end up in the same small town, both of them in little reading ruts of their own, and they come together and challenge each other to write books of each other's genres. They do a little genre swap, and it goes from there. And you know what? I did have a good time. It was overall pretty sweet. I liked how grief was woven in. I like reading books about writing books. I think that's always fun, because you can also feel that the author often has loads of fun with it. I mean, Yellowface is the classic example of that, but there are loads of other books where the main character is an author and you can just feel the energy radiating out the pages at you. So yeah, I did enjoy myself, but in the end, the ups and the downs ended up feeling verging into the unrealistic, and I also found the main man a little bit cliched, a little bit too cliched. A degree of cliche is very welcome, because that's what makes books comforting sometimes, but there's a balance. The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. I love this book. I love this book so much. It really pleasantly surprised me. It was on my TBR for ages. I did want to read it, but it just looked like another lost gal in her 20s or 30s book, which is a very popular type of book at the moment, and I do enjoy them, but I just thought this book would be kind of good, but I wasn't in a rush to read it. It's about a student called Rachel who meets her best friend James while working at a bookshop together. They quite quickly move in together in quite a grotty house and get up to all kinds of tomfoolery. Rachel has a bit of a crush on her professor and orchestrates a pretty odd book event for his book at the bookstore to try to seduce him. Anyway, the professor that she's in love with does end up a part of her life, but not in the way that I think she planned or expected. It's very creative and pretty emotional at points, but then is also really silly, and it just never feels like it's taking itself too seriously, but also somehow is really smart. The plot is also ridiculous, but absolutely convincing.
Footage disappeared, but next up is Weyward, which is a multi-generational witchy tale.
I love bouncing between eras and learning about people's families and learning how people are similar and how they're dissimilar. So that was really beautiful. And it also just has this incredible atmosphere. The witchcraft is underpinned by this connection with nature and being able to communicate with animals, being able to draw on the power of, I don't want to say nature again, but draw on the power of the world around us. Finally, I listened to Idle Burning. This was a very rogue choice. I hadn't actually really heard of it until I saw it on my library audiobooks list. I am very glad I read it though. First of all, it is very short, so it's kind of bite-sized, but pretty punchy. It's about a high school student called Akari. She is obsessed with an idol called Mazaki, and he is one of the most famous, or he's a part of one of the most famous Japanese pop bands in the world. The story starts off with an incident where Mazaki assaults a fan, and you don't know the context, you don't know why he did it. All you know is that there's this storm whirling around him and his popularity is falling, and that's it. That's the plot. It really is all about her obsession for him. It goes into a lot of detail about how she follows his life, how she chronicles everything he ever says and does, and the amount of money she puts towards being a fan of him. I learnt loads about Oshi culture and fandom, but I didn't get much more from this novel. The plot doesn't really go anywhere, and I know like it's definitely meant to be a bit of a no plot, just vibes type of book, but I really was expecting a bit more. Before I read it, I read that it was meant to be about, you know, fame and alienation and obsession, and it is about those things, but I don't know, I just thought there'd be in a little bit more depth than they were in the end. But yeah, that's me. I'm pretty pleased with how eclectic that book list is, and I'm also pleased because quite a few of these books were on my books that I want to read this year list, so that's good. And I also read a few things that I would have never expected to read, and that's fun too. That's what this channel is all about. Finally, I just want to quickly talk about the one book that I care to read in April, and that is The Stand by Stephen King. I got this from the library, and that's a part of why I have to read this in April, because I need to return it to the library. But I also need to just suck it up and give it a go. I'm extremely afraid. I've never read Stephen King before, so the anticipation has kind of got the better of me, and I've kind of psyched myself out. I keep reading other smaller books before picking this up, but I think it's time, and I think I'm ready. March was a good month. It was a soothing month. I read a lot of quite chill books, and I'm ready for something not chill. Thank you for watching. I hope you had a lovely weekend. I hope you have a lovely week. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.